You ever walk into a home that isn't even your style and still think, why does this feel so good? Well, that's not luck, and it's not just good taste. A lot of it is psychology. So in this video, I'm going to show you 7 psychological principles that'll make your home feel amazing and how to implement them without renovating or buying a bunch of furniture. So let's start with something super primal. Your brain's need to feel safe. If you've got a desk where you can't focus, a bed where you toss and turn, or a beautiful sofa you never actually want to sit on, the reason might not be your taste. It might be your layout. And the idea here comes from what's known as Prospect-Refuge Theory, which says that we're wired to feel best in spots where we can see what's coming while our back is protected. And it's not hard to understand why. Just think about early humans. The safest place for them wasn't in the middle of an open field. It was the edge of a forest or a shallow cave, places where you can see the open landscape in front of you, which is your prospect, while having a solid surface behind you, which is your refuge. And even though we live in modern homes with locks and lights, your nervous system still responds the same way. We relax when our view is open and our back feels protected. And you can see this most clearly in children. They're not scared of their bedroom, they're scared of the blind spots, the closet, the hallway, and under the bed. So kids call it monsters, but adults call it, I just can't relax in this room. But it's the same feeling. Which brings me to one of the most common layout mistakes I see in homes. We put ourselves in positions where we can't see what's behind us. For example, a lot of people set up a home office desk facing a wall, which means that they've got their back to the doorway for 8 hours a day. Or they drop a sofa in the middle of the room so the main walkway is directly behind them. And no, you're not literally thinking that a predator is going to come and eat you, but your brain still treats that blind spot as a problem. And your amygdala, which is the part of your brain that detects threats, it stays switched on, spending energy monitoring what you can't see behind you. And so you don't necessarily feel fear, but what you do feel is restlessness, trouble focusing, tension in your body, and the urge to get up and leave the room for no reason. So if a room looks good but never feels good, this is usually why. So here's how to fix it. You want to set up a few key spots in a command position. So first, walk through your home and identify the main locations where you spend the most time. So for most of us, that's going to be your desk chair, your sofa, and the head of your bed. And then for each one, aim for 2 things. Number 1, a solid backing, so a wall or something else substantial and solid directly behind you. And then number 2, a clear view, where you can see the room's primary entry point from where you sit or lie down. But what do you do if that doesn't make sense for your space? Like, what if you're floating a sofa in an open concept living room and you don't want to jam it up against the wall? No problem. In that situation, you want to create some artificial refuge to calm your brain. So put a solid console behind a sofa and then give it some visual weight in the form of tall lamps, stacked books, and a large plant. And pro tip, dense foliage works especially well here, because all that creates a psychological barrier that tells your nervous system, my back is protected, so I can relax. But I want you to notice, this isn't a renovation. Just by shifting your furniture into a real command position, you reduce that low-level threat response so the room feels more relaxing, your focus gets stronger, and your body loses the tension because you finally gave your brain the feeling of safety it's been craving. But once your room feels safe, there's a second problem that inevitably comes up, and it's the reason one nice upgrade can turn into a full-blown spending spiral. Because have you ever finally saved up for one beautiful, expensive piece, but then the second you bring it home, it feels like it made your whole room look worse? Like, you splurge on a sleek, modern velvet sofa, and as soon as you set it down, suddenly your vintage coffee table looks cheap, the rug you used to love now looks tattered, and even the curtains feel outdated. And you get this almost magnetic urge to replace everything else just to match the sofa. And you're not being dramatic, you're just experiencing something psychologists call the Diderot Effect. And there's a little bit of history behind this one. Back in the 1700s, the French philosopher Denis Diderot was gifted a luxurious scarlet robe, and he loved that robe until he wore it in his study, because once that robe was in the room, everything else looked shabby by comparison: the desk, the chairs, and all his decor. And the mismatch bothered him so much that he slowly replaced item after item and ended up under a mountain of debt. And that's why we call it the Diderot Effect. When one new higher status item changes your baseline, and now everything around it feels like it has to level up. So fast forward to now, and this is how the furniture industry makes a lot of its money, because we crave a sense of cohesion in our environment. So when you introduce a piece that speaks a totally different style language, whether it's new versus old, formal versus casual, or sleek versus rustic, your brain recognizes that as friction, and it tries to fix that friction the fastest way it knows how, by buying more stuff. But the goal isn't to stop buying nice things. The goal is to stop one nice thing from forcing everything else to audition for its job. And the way out of this is to design with bridge pieces, materials and objects that make different styles look like they belong together. Because if your room is perfectly matched, with everything in the same wood tone or looking like it came from the same store, then any new piece sticks out immediately. There's no flexibility. Instead, you want to build a baseline that can absorb changes by mixing textures and finishes on purpose. And so some examples of bridge materials that work almost every time are raw or weathered wood, aged brass, distressed leather, heavily textured linen, and stone or ceramics with some visible variation. These materials act like visual buffers, and they tell your brain this room has layers, not a single catalog identity. So for example, a polished modern chrome lamp looks weird on a cheap laminate table, but put that same lamp on a scarred antique wood table, suddenly it looks well curated. So learn to leverage bridge pieces so you can add that one beautiful upgrade without triggering the feeling of needing to replace everything. But even if you beat the Diderot effect and arrange your furniture into a solid command position, your room can still make you feel on edge. And this is something a lot of people miss because so many people think about interior design as something purely visual. But your home isn't just something you look at, it's also something you hear and feel. And you already know this feeling. You walk into a room that looks beautiful, but it feels oddly tense. Like every footstep is loud, every chair scrape hits your nerves, and even the clink of a glass feels sharp. Because a room can be gorgeous and perfectly balanced on paper and still spike your stress if it sounds wrong. And the reason comes down to how your brain filters noise through a process called sensory gating. Sensory gating is your brain's noise filter. It blocks out safe, repetitive background sounds so you can focus and relax. It's why you stop noticing the refrigerator hum after a few minutes. And in a quiet, acoustically soft room, your brain can block out the small stuff really easily, and your nervous system actually settles. The problem is that modern design has been trending toward flat, reflective surfaces. So people rip out carpet for hardwood or vinyl plank, and they choose smooth drywall, bare windows, glass, metal, and minimal decor. And so it all looks clean and nice in photos, but acoustically, it can turn your home into an echo chamber. Because in rooms full of hard surfaces, sound doesn't get absorbed. It bounces, and that creates sharp, high-frequency reverberations that are completely unpredictable, and your brain has a much harder time filtering that out. So every footstep, every chair scrape, and every clink on a stone countertop lands like a little jolt, and your brain interprets that as chaos. And this is the reason you can sit in a trendy minimalist coffee shop for an hour and leave feeling weirdly exhausted and irritable, even if nothing bad happened. The space looked great, but it made your nervous system work overtime. And so the fix is to design for acoustic anchoring. You need to add in elements not just because they look good, but because they absorb sound and stop that acoustic bounce. So start from the ground up. If you've got a rug and you've still got an echo in your room, drop a thick rug pad underneath it, because that pad often does more for sound absorption than the rug itself. Then soften your vertical surfaces. Use thick lined drapery instead of relying only on blinds or shades. And when you choose art, prioritize pieces that don't add more hard reflection. So felt-backed art, tapestries, and unframed canvas are great choices. but framed glass prints can reflect sound almost as harshly as bare drywall. Because when you layer these soft, sound-absorbing materials throughout your space, the entire room gets quieter in a really deep way. And just like repositioning your furniture so your back isn't exposed to the room, that quieter sound profile signals safety to your nervous system. But even if your room is quiet and comfortable, you can still wake up one day and hate how it looks. Because you might spend weekend after weekend nailing a specific aesthetic, but then a couple of months later you look at it and just feel nothing. And it's not even that it looks bad, it's more that you feel weirdly disconnected from it. And most people blame that on being fickle or addicted to shopping. But a lot of the time, it's a psychological quirk known as the mere exposure effect. The mere exposure effect is the brain's tendency to prefer things simply because they're familiar. It was first documented in the late 1960s by the psychologist Robert Zients, who noticed in his experiments that people rated random shapes and even nonsense words more positively after seeing them repeatedly. And it's all because the brain equates familiarity with safety, and safety is good. But here's the problem with that. Our brains didn't evolve in an environment where they could be shown the same aesthetic 300 times in a single afternoon. And social media exploits that wiring at a scale the brain was never built to handle, manufacturing preferences you didn't actually choose. So contrary to what you might think, when you scroll Pinterest or Instagram for inspiration, you're not seeing endless variety. You're actually seeing the same micro trends repeated in slightly different ways until they start to feel like your personality. The same arched mirrors, the same travertine table, and the same olive tree in the corner. And after your brain sees something 300 times, it starts to mistake exposure for taste. And because you now think you love these things, you build your living room around them. But that preference in your mind is fragile, and the second the algorithm moves on, the spell breaks, and suddenly your room feels like it's not for you anymore. And that's where trend fatigue comes from. So how do you escape that cycle without swearing off inspiration completely? You need to run an analog test. The point is to break the grip of the algorithm for long enough to figure out what you actually like when nobody is feeding it to you. So you step away from your phone and look at your real life. So start with your closet. What colors do you wear repeatedly? Not the ones you bought for a fantasy version of yourself, but the ones you actually reach for. And look at the materials as well. Are you drawn to crisp, structured materials like leather and tailored cotton, or softer, more lived-in textures like knitwear and denim? Then think about the places you love in the real world. That might be a hotel, a restaurant, or even a city you visited where you felt right at home. What did that place feel like? Was it warm and dim, bright and minimal, old and layered? Lean into what makes you feel good. And then look at physical references. Go to your favorite bookstore or even a library and flip through architecture, interiors, and art books. Notice what catches your attention. This is different from just scrolling through social media feeds because books won't be in touch with today's algorithm, and they also aren't personalized to you. So you'll catch yourself reacting to things before the algorithm has had a chance to prime you. And when you anchor your design choices to your analog life like this, you bypass the mere exposure effect entirely. You stop designing to satisfy a feed, and you start building a home that matches you. And that's the goal. Because a room built on your preferences will still feel like you 10 years from now, even after the internet has moved on. But there's another layer to all this that most people never consider. Your home can match your identity perfectly and still leave you feeling drained. Because design isn't just about taste, it's also about energy. Because if you work in a modern office, commute into the concrete jungle, or live in a newly built apartment full of synthetic finishes, you probably feel pretty mentally wiped at the end of the day. And it's easy to blame that on your job or your poor sleep, but your environment has an outsized impact on your brain, and it can either restore your attention or burn right through it. And this is where attention restoration theory comes in. Attention restoration theory was developed by a pair of environmental psychologists, and the basic idea is that attention isn't infinite and it operates in two distinct modes. The first is directed attention, which I'll call effort mode. This is the type of attention you use when you're answering emails, reading spreadsheets, and driving in traffic. Your brain is constantly filtering, deciding, and blocking out noise. So it works hard, but it also burns out pretty quickly. And then the second mode is soft fascination, which I'll call recovery mode. This is the type of attention you use when you watch tree leaves dance in the wind, stare at a campfire, or look at waves on the beach. These things hold your attention, but they don't demand anything from you. And that's why being in nature feels so restorative. Your brain gets to rest while still being gently engaged. But here's the design mistake. We build homes that look sleek, but behave like an office. I'm talking perfectly smooth walls, flat cabinetry, plastic laminates, and fake wood. Everything machine-made, symmetrical, and flawless. But when you sit in a room like that, your eyes have nowhere to land because there's no natural complexity, no visual softness, and no organic variation. So your brain stays stuck in effort mode even when you're supposed to be off duty. And that's a recipe for low-grade, constant mental fatigue. So the fix isn't just to add a plant. The fix is to bring in the kind of natural pattern your brain is built for. Because in nature, patterns are complex and irregular. Think about the grain in a piece of wood or the veins in a natural stone. Your visual system evolved outdoors, so it processes that kind of pattern effortlessly. It's basically your brain's native language. So when you introduce those kind of organic elements into your home, you give your attention a place to rest. The space stops demanding effort and starts offering recovery. So if you want your home to recharge you instead of drain you, here are a few simple swaps that make a big difference. First, start with your largest surfaces. Bring in real wood with visible grain rather than perfectly smooth painted finishes. And add in some natural stone if it fits your budget, even if it's just a small dose like a side table, a tray, or the base of a lamp. And look for veining and variation, not for uniform patterns. Second, layer in natural textiles with some texture to them. So think linen, wool, chunky cotton, and anything else with an irregular weave that catches light differently across the surface. And if you want the most budget-friendly version of this, focus on the things you touch and look at the most. Things like a wooden coffee table, linen curtains, or a ceramic lamp. Those are the kinds of places where soft fascination can have an instant impact. Because when your room has real natural complexity, your brain can stop working so hard. And that's when your home actually feels restorative. But once your home stops draining you and starts restoring you, there's still something that can sabotage everything. And it's not your layout or your lighting, it's the object you're keeping out of guilt. I mean, look around your room right now. Is there a piece of furniture you don't even like, but you refuse to get rid of? Maybe it's a massive armchair you spent a lot of money on years ago, or maybe it's a dark carved dining table that you inherited from your parents that completely clashes with the lighter, more modern look you want now. Whatever it is, odds are you're keeping it for reasons that sound responsible. It's still in good condition, it was expensive when you bought it, or it has family history. But here's what's really happening. That one item is quietly dictating your entire room. It's forcing you to design around it, and it's costing you peace of mind every time you enter the room. And so really, this comes down to two mental traps. The first is the endowment effect, which says that we overvalue things simply because we own them. And the moment something becomes ours, it feels more important than it actually is. And then the second is the sunk cost fallacy, which says that we hate letting go of something when we've already invested money or emotion into it, even if it's making our life worse. And the result of these two traps is design paralysis, where you try to make that problem item work instead of admitting that it's a problem. And so you buy a new rug to distract from the chair, or you paint the walls to distract from the table, and you keep spending money treating symptoms while the real issue stays firmly planted in the room. But here's the reframe that breaks that spell. I call it the stranger's price test. Stand in front of that piece of furniture that doesn't feel right to you and imagine you don't own it. Instead, imagine you're in a thrift store or scrolling Facebook Marketplace and you see that exact chair or table with a price tag on it. The question is, would you buy it right now and bring it into your home? Be honest with yourself here. If the answer is no, you wouldn't buy it today, then it's not a practical choice. It's psychological drag. And you have to think about it like this. The money you spent years ago is already gone, and holding on to this piece of furniture doesn't get that money back. It just charges you a daily tax in the form of visual friction, guilt, and compromise. Because The fastest way to make your room feel lighter and more cohesive isn't buying 10 new decorative items. It's giving yourself permission to remove the high friction piece that you've been designing around for years. So if you are holding on to that piece out of obligation, make a plan to sell it, donate it, or replace it. I promise you, your future self will thank you. But once you remove that piece that's been dragging your whole room down, the next step is making your space feel open again. And this next mistake is the one people most often make in small rooms. Because once you clear out the psychological dead weight, you need to place what's left in a way that doesn't trigger that cramped, boxed-in feeling. But here's the problem. When a living room feels small or awkward, most people shove every piece of furniture tight against the walls because they think that by creating as much empty floor space as possible in the center, that should equal a bigger room. But what you end up with is a living room with a layout that looks fit for a high school dance, and it makes the room feel cheaper and tighter, not bigger. Because when furniture is flush against the wall, your eye loses its sense of depth. Everything turns into one flat outline around the perimeter, and the middle of the room feels like a dead void instead of usable space. This is the reason waiting rooms feel so weird. All the chairs line the walls and everyone stares into the empty center, but the rooms don't feel spacious, they just feel tense. But fortunately for you, the fix is actually simple, but it does take a bit of a leap of faith, because you need to float the room. Now, I've talked about floating your furniture in a few different videos, and I always get the same comment every time. That's great if you have a big living room, but what if you live in a small apartment? And so I want to address that now. Because when I say float your furniture, you don't need to drag your sofa 2 feet away from the wall. You just need to break the seal. So here's what you do. Pull your sofa 1 to 2 inches or 3 to 5 centimeters off the wall. That's it. Because that tiny gap creates a shadow line behind the sofa, and that shadow line is what tells your brain that the room has depth. And depth is what makes the room feel bigger. Now, that alone will make a surprisingly big difference, but if you want to take this a step further, there are 2 other things you can do as well. First, make sure every room has one clear walking lane. So pick a single path from one side of the room to the other and keep that line clear. If you have to choose between a bigger coffee table and a clear walkway, choose the walkway every time. And if you're really tight on space, swap out bulky furniture pieces for more airy ones. So think a sofa perched up on feet, a chair with open arms, and a coffee table that allows air to pass under it. When you bring in those pieces, you're not just saving inches, you're also letting light pass through, which keeps the room feeling open and fresh. But now that you understand how your brain interprets your space, you're ready to take things to the next level. And that means learning a system to tie it all together. So watch this video next, where I'll teach you one of the design frameworks I've developed for turning even the most basic, boring room into a space you love to spend time in.